people are really excited about being back in person, and these events indicate it. So. And let me just acknowledge our good friend who has spoken many times to the New England Council in years past, the former congressman from the South Shore, former congressman, a great public servant, Bill Delahunt, who is here today. Later this year, the Dedham Superior Court will be named after Congressman Bill Delahunt for all of his good works and years of public service and well-deserved recognition, to say the least. I would also like just to acknowledge Catherine Craven here. Catherine is a board member of the New England Council, but more importantly, she'll be receiving a Doctor of Honorary degree from the New England School of Law this, I believe, next month. So congratulations to all that she does in public service. And we're very, very proud of her, to say the least, and needless to say, honored to have her part of the New England Council. Today, we not only have one, not two, but three sponsors of today's breakfast. And I just want to take a moment to recognize who they are. The first, American Tower, represented today by a High Park High most distinguished alum, Ed DeSanto. And board member Becca Gould, who we refer to as our ambassador at large. There isn't a day that goes by that you will call someone in our office to say, I have another member that is interested in joining the New England Council, and we can't say thank you enough to Becca and all that she does. And Becca Gould is somebody that serves in public service. Becca is a member of the Governor's Commission for People with Intellectual Disabilities. She's also just been appointed to the Bunker Hill Community College Board of Directors. So another example, just giving back to the community. These are wonderful, wonderful members that we have, and we're proud to recognize them and have them part of the New England Council. We also have the second sponsors, Iron Mountain, and they truly are a mountain of a giant in our community, and they're represented today by Barry Heighton, who is representing Iron Mountain today, but also Jennifer Gallagher is here, and she is also a board member of the New England Council. So to Jennifer, to Barry, and your entire team, thank you. Thank you for what you do day in and day out as a corporate citizen of this great community of ours. And third, as NAREIT, the National Association of Real Estate Investment Trust, a newer council member, which both American Tower and Iron Mountain are active members of. NAREIT is represented today by John Jones. Now that we're back in-person programming, I mentioned what we had in the past. We have a few other events scheduled in the next week or two. April 13th, we look forward to our annual breakfast program with the Attorney General here of the Commonwealth, Maura Healey, and it will be hosted by Putnam Investment. Later in April, we'll host Capitol Hill Reports with Senator Jack Reed in Providence and with Congressman John Larson, 1st Congressional District in Hartford. We'll be back in New Hampshire on April 25th, for Politics and Eggs breakfast with Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. And of course, we hope you'll join us in our nation's capital on May 11th and 12th for our Washington Leaders Conference. Back after a 2-year hiatus, registration is open and sponsorship opportunities are still available. Needless to say, today we are delighted to welcome back a great friend of the New England Council and someone who I am proud to call not only my personal friend, my close friend, and that is the Congressman Richie Neal. Again, I want to thank all of you for joining us today And for purposes of a very, very formal introduction, I'm pleased to introduce Barry Hyten, the Chief Financial Officer of Iron Mountain.
He said the rest is up to me, so. Thank you so much for the introduction and kind words, Jim. Good morning and welcome, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today in person with the New England Council, its amazing staff, and all our friends and colleagues. As Jim mentioned, I'm Barry Hyten, and I'm the CFO at Iron Mountain, and that's a global data and information management company based right here in Boston at One Federal. It's an honor and a privilege to introduce a good friend to Iron Mountain, Congressman Neal, and for the opportunity to co-sponsor this event with our colleagues at American Tower and at NAREIT. Congressman Neal was first elected to the United States House of Representatives in 1988 and served his first 2 terms on the House Banking Committee before joining the most influential committee in the House, the Ways and Means Committee. In January 2019, Congressman Neal was elected by his colleagues to assume the esteemed position of chairman, marking the first time since 1875 that a representative from Massachusetts had done so. Chairman Neal's committee work puts him at the forefront of many policy matters important to the economy and welfare of Massachusetts, the New England region, and to the country. Throughout his time in Congress, Congressman Neal has led efforts to make employees' retirement savings easier to achieve, as well as promoted trade policies which ensure New England businesses remain competitive in the global economy. In addition, Chairman Neal has been a tireless advocate of fairness and the simplification of the U.S. tax code, a staunch defender of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and an advocate for investments in education and workforce training to prepare current and future generations for the jobs of the future. Chairman Neal has also been a friend and supporter of real estate investment trusts, which are well represented today here with Iron Mountain, American Tower, and our REIT Trade Association, NAREIT. We thank you for your support for our industry over many, many years, Chairman. Massachusetts and New England have no greater supporter for the business community as well as the workforce we employ than Chairman Neal. In addition to being chairman of the most powerful committee in the House, Chairman Neal is the dean of both the Massachusetts delegation and New England congressional delegation. His colleagues value and respect his leadership and look to him for guidance on issues that matter most to the region. He is also a member of Speaker Pelosi's leadership team and brings his New England perspective to the influence the House Democratic Party. Congressman, I thank you for your service, especially during these most challenging times. I hope you will please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Congressman Neal.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you. The last time I had that sort of enthusiastic standing ovation, I was mayor of Springfield, and they were coming after me. Thank you, Barry, very much, and certainly Iron Mountain is a terrific company, and the head of the company recently did something for me in terms of developing some information I thought that was just remarkable. So thanks to Jim Brett and the New England Council, you know my affinity and my regard for what it is that the New England Council does. I think this assembly is indicative of the governing forces across Massachusetts and New England, and the many voices in the chorus always make for better legislation. And I also want to acknowledge my friend Bill Delahunt. That's pretty good. They're naming a courthouse after you. I demand equal time. Bill was a really effective member of the Congress and a terrific advocate, but most importantly, a nice guy. And we were able to really work very carefully and closely together on a lot of different issues because we both shared a similar interest, governing, which in this atmosphere is exceedingly difficult. We're all pounded with more information second by second, and it becomes harder to try to figure out what's misinformation and what's disinformation. There is a substantial difference between the two, But also, I think at this time, those legions who are interested in governing, we need to pay a lot of attention to them. And there are things that I have devoted my career to: regular order, amendments, transparency, a real institutional knowledge of how Congress should operate. I'm going to talk about some of the things that we've gotten done after I offer some comments on Ukraine. This is an unprovoked assault on a free people. The idea that Vladimir Putin gets to decide who joins NATO is a non-starter. The idea that he makes an argument that's almost Orwellian, that Ukraine is not a separate and distinct culture and a separate people, is ridiculous. The idea that he gets to determine the fate of the people of Eastern Europe is nonsensical. And I think that Joe Biden has done a really good job of rallying the world around the principle that Ukraine is a separate culture, a separate people, and they are entitled to self-determination. And for those who are talking about this notion of manifest destiny that Putin has embraced, ask the people of Poland or Romania or Bulgaria or in the Baltic states if they want to go back to Russian domination. The answer is a clear no. And America needs to stand with them and recall at times like this that we can be of enormous help simply through the things that we do on an everyday basis. I have participated in a number of events, and I'm going to talk a little bit as we move on about what we were able to do with the Ways and Means Committee. We suspended permanent normal trading relationships with Russia. That's a big deal. We passed the oil embargo. That is waiting for action over in the Senate as well. But we've done our part in the House, and again, I have a Ukrainian population in the Ludlow area and in Deerfield as well. And a rally the other night at the Jewish Federation, a Jewish Community Center, on a humanitarian basis, where members of all religious groups stood shoulder to shoulder to stand up for the Ukrainians. And right now, we are all Ukrainians as we watch these issues develop. There is as you know, in public life now, I think because of changes that have taken place in the news media and the way news is reported, and much of it has to do with the fact that there's less context to news. There's more conflict, and largely I think it took place because of the fact that a lot of regional press, they simply lost a lot of standing as social media consumed more and more of issue governance. But the problem with that is you need context to many of these stories, and I regret very much that many of the big things that we've done in Congress, particularly in the Ways and Means Committee, have saved the American economy. The CARES Act, Speaker Pelosi and I and Secretary Mnuchin, we wrote that bill in 8 days. In her office, hour after hour, we went back and forth, not a lot, some of it wasn't quite so pleasant, but we were able to iron out an agreement that saved the American economy. So let me give you some context to what I'm just saying. March 11th, 2020, that's when Dr. Fauci issued his warning as to what was coming. And at that time, within weeks, we lost 22 million jobs in America. Where are we now? All 22 million jobs have come back, and there are 11.3 million jobs available in America right now that go unanswered. The unemployment rate, even here in Massachusetts, about 4%. American companies did extraordinarily well. Labor has done extraordinarily well in the midst of this pandemic. There are almost 20,000 people alone who have died in Massachusetts, and we're headed toward 1 million across America. So our response to the pandemic has been superb. And at the same time, we know that we're going to have to be on guard as we go forward because an additional variant might come by. And amongst those achievements that we've had, I thought this morning as I was getting ready at a hotel just around the corner, infrastructure. When you look out the window of that hotel as I did this morning, if people can't understand what infrastructure investment means for a city, This is an international city today. I mean, it is difficult to govern major American cities on a daily basis, but where this city is today, in some measure, is a reflection of what happened with the Big Dig. $16 billion of principal, $6 billion of interest. It opened up the seaport. That was a long-term investment. And now, Governor Baker, who I've had a great relationship with, I want to tell you, the two of us, daily through the pandemic, we spoke. And Massachusetts is about to receive almost $9 billion in infrastructure funding. That comes on top of the CARES Act, on top of the rescue package. And so I was kidding him before he announced that he was not going to run for re-election, and I was with him at the State House, and I said to him, you know, Governor, you should run for re-election, and I'll tell you why. You could really screw up and have the money you've got and still look like a great manager. But it's also an argument for all of us in this room. These have to be wise, long-term investments with infrastructure, not just feel-good things. So education comes to mind. Physical infrastructure comes to mind. Healthcare comes to mind. These are the sorts of things that we should be doing with those dollars. And I think that the state is well poised to do that. And you should know, for those of you who are very Boston-centric, my intention is to get East-West Rail up and going. Thank you. J.P. Burks from Holyoke, he was cheering for that. But the idea that commuter rail stops in Worcester, it gets pretty bad after Worcester. Our intention is to proceed, and the governor's been terrific on it. I think I've turned the corner with him. And the last conversation we had at the State House, I got the impression he was all in. Small but inside information, as this infrastructure money is allocated, we have 3 members from Massachusetts who are on the infrastructure committee. I know in this age that it's hard to explain that to people. And I took the lessons of Speaker McCormick, Speaker O'Neal, Joe Moakley, and did the same thing. Everybody in Massachusetts has their first committee assignment. The first one they wanted. And by the way, everybody in New England got the first assignment that they wanted. So we have 3 members of the delegation that are going to decide how to spend, I believe it's about $9.6 billion here in Massachusetts. That's a huge opportunity for the state. And I also will just say this, because you've been such a good audience and you wouldn't be here if you didn't like the inside business. I'm all in on earmarking. Yeah, I mean, I also think it's going to contribute to maybe lubricating the legislative process. Sometimes you're in the room and people say, well, there's no way I'm voting for that. And I said, get him in here for a second. Let's find out if he really means it. And we've worked from there, and it's the Ways and Means Committee has jurisdiction for tax, trade, tariffs, Social Security, Medicare, pensions, management of the public debt, and welfare. It's a very hard committee to get on. I mean, it's really impossible. For most members, it's just impossible. And they will all say it's my first choice, and I caught it just right because of Joe Moakley. But I look back at it, and members, they're always vying for the opportunity to get on the Ways and Means Committee. And one of them said to me for months, he said, look, he said, Mr. Chairman, I want to be on that committee. And I said, I know you do. I said, there's a competing force in Philadelphia. And I said, it's going to be hard to argue that you should have 2 from Philadelphia. And he said, well, please, he said, this is really important to me career-wise, and this could be really, really helpful to me. And this went on for about 6 months, and we were getting to the bottom of the 9th inning. And he wandered over to me on the House floor, and he said, Mr. Chairman, if you can put me on the Ways and Means Committee, I'll do what you want. And he said to my staff, he's going on the Ways and Means Committee. That's what we want. I actually learned those lessons because I joined the committee when Mr. Rostenkowski was the chairman, so I learned that. And by the way, congratulations to all of you. I got more tax advice from the lobby to the podium this morning than I've received anywhere, including Washington. Amongst our other achievements, I just want to say something again about research and development for Massachusetts. What happened in Kendall Square during this pandemic between Pfizer and Moderna. Let's not just take these things for granted. They just don't happen. What happened in 8 months with the vaccinations? That was Massachusetts-centered in so many ways. Those were the breakthroughs. So we never want to give up what we have here in Massachusetts in the ecosystem of research and development. In addition, I know there are some hospital representatives here. I pushed hard, as you recall, clearly on the issue of surprise billing. And we had a victory on it and pushed back against the critics, and we won. And I feel very strongly that was Kevin Brady, the Republican on my committee. The two of us worked hand in hand to get that done. So that was another huge issue. We're going out of the Competes Act. And the Competes Act, I think, is largely based upon chip manufacturing, which we're going to have to address. There is an economy of scale, however, that's attached to chip manufacturing. If it's just low-wage jobs, it's going to be hard for us to compete internationally. But if we can use chip manufacturing to turn those into research and development and high-wage, do that. So that's coming together. The Speaker has tasked me to put this to bed, and we intend to get that done. I think there's a small difference of opinion we have with the Senate. It's over trade adjustment assistance. I think those who have been dislocated because of trade policy, they should be given the opportunity to receive some governmental assistance in terms of retraining to get back into the workforce. I know that the Canadian Consul General's office is well represented here this morning, and when people say you can't do this and you can't do that, when the Speaker said to me, you got to get USMCA done. You've got to get that done. Do you know what it's like to go into the Democratic caucus and talk about trade? You should be armed. And she kept saying to me, you've got to get it done. You've got to get it done. She would call me from all over her world travels. The last time she was eating date nuts off a Christmas tree in Austria when she called. And she said, where are we? And she's pretty relentless, as you've noticed. And so we were able to get the largest hemispheric trade agreement done in the history of the world as a replacement for NAFTA. Why is that important? Because in the end, 195 Democrats voted for an international trade agreement, and 194 Republicans voted for the international trade agreement. This city is trade dependent. It's a big deal in this city. You just have to talk about the airport, talk about the Port of Boston, and to see what happens here. It's almost 1/3 of the state's economy. And here in Boston, I believe it's even more pronounced. So we intend to get the Competes Act over the goal line as well. Next week, we're going to take up retirement savings. And on the retirement savings front, we are likely to pass what we call 2.0. And 2.0 is simply an expansion of retirement opportunities for everybody. And minimum distribution over 10 years moves to 75. It's a really good piece of work. And again, it doesn't receive a lot of the attention. But can I say this? It passed the Ways and Means Committee unanimously. So standing in these rooms and sitting in these rooms day after day and making these arguments and presenting and hearing what people have to say, the Secure Act 2.0 is going to be great for savers. We're going to provide opportunities now for part-time workers to set aside prescribed dollars every month. We're going to set aside opportunities for automatic enrollment so that employees have to say they're not going to enter the plan. You're in. You want out, you have to sign a document to get out. So I think that is likely to pass the House, and the Senate will get to it fairly quickly as well. So what's interesting about all of this, including the omnibus spending bill, is the last point before I take some questions from you. And that the issue that's now kind of lingering in the background is Build Back Better. And it's one of those peculiar issues in public life where the two senators that are opposed to its current form, and it passed the House, by the way. We were able to get it through the committee. I wish it were more bipartisan, but we also provided a tax bill in there that was not punitive. It addressed reality, and I think that it was fairly well met by markets. The problem we have with Build Back Better in the Senate is one of those just crazy points of irony. Senator Sinema is for the social investments. She's against the tax increases. Senator Manchin is for the tax increases but against the social spending. So when the Senate is divided at 50-50, you push this way and you lose somebody. You push that way and you lose somebody. But I have talked to the president about it as recently as last week, And our intention is to pass it, and Joe Biden's going to declare victory regardless of what it is that we in the end pass. Had a good working relationship with Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema. I've lobbied them pretty hard. To the moment, it's been a stalemate, but I intend to stay at it. So we want to get this done. It's a big, big issue. The child tax credit was transformative, and largely because the child tax credit, because of electronic deposit. Look, when I worked this through with Bob Rubin and Jack Lew and Hank Paulson, they were all in on this. And the idea was to simultaneously create demand, but acknowledge there had to be a public investment to help stimulate demand. It was well met, people liked it, and we intend to stay with it if we can get another year extension out of it, and then we can go back and forth. A year's a lifetime in legislative channels right now, so I think that that's doable as well. So with that, I'm always happy to come to the New England Council. It's, for me, it's a great landing spot. It's also braced in reality. And many of you know that regardless of our political traditions here in Massachusetts, that we've also had as our North Star getting big things done. And I continue to believe that the things that we've done in the Ways and Means Committee, which then became law, and last point is that there's this marvelous moment when you take a call from the president, or the president sees you and singles you out. And I've also been in that Oval Office when I wanted to give the president bad news, so I was looking for the exit. You know, no, that ain't going to happen, Mr. President. But in this case here, the legislation that we've done really has been transformative. I wish there was more attention that we could devote to it. It's just a very difficult thing to do if you're not hollering every day. And when you watch members of Congress now walk through the hallways with the phone up talking to the audience, it dismays me, largely because of the system I came to. I just as soon sit in that room forever. Okay, we're not leaving. And I've said that to members of the committee. You want to go home on Friday? Vote for this bill. Because if you don't vote for this bill, you're not going home on Friday. We can sit here on Saturday morning, we'll sit here on Sunday night. But we're going to sit here until we get an agreement. It generally can work. I know that the system doesn't always provide that patience anymore, but nonetheless, just for me and personal reflection, to get to chair the best committee in all of Congress and to deal with the issues we deal with, and also to have a decent working relationship with the Republicans, because I will always say, look, tell me what you need. And with some humor, a couple of the Republicans, there are 3 or 4 of them, because I get on pretty well with them, and I know you like this. So one of them said, would you put my amendment in? And another one said, will you put my amendment in? The third one said, will you put my amendment in? I said the same thing to all of them. I will put your amendment in if you vote for the bill. And they said, well, I said, you got 72 hours. Think about it. Because you just can't have them saying they voted against the bill but got what they wanted. So I'm accommodating of the idea that I'll put the things in for you. No fanfare, no argument in public, no criticisms. Just vote for the bill. And that's the system I signed up for. And by the way, that's a system that still should prevail. With that, how about some questions?
As always, it is great to hear from you, Mr. Chairman, especially now in person again. And we know you pulled in many directions, particularly during this hectic time in Congress. I also want to take a quick moment to thank Jim Brett, our co-sponsors, Iron Mountain and NAREIT. But it sure feels good to hear interpersonal relationships functioning. I think good news sometimes doesn't get much news, and it's unfortunate. But like many here this morning, American Tower feels fortunate to call you a longtime friend. Through various roles that you've had, you seem to be a dean of so many things, and yet none of them are university. That's surprising that will come. But a lot of people don't know that before the chairman goes to Washington every week, I learned this from Margaret, the first thing he does is something for this state and for young people. He teaches a course on public speaking, of which he's very good at. And it shows the kind of commitment that he has. 5 years ago, at New England Council function, he said, you know, I am worried about the demographics. I'm worried about people retiring, and they don't have anything to retire on. And one of the things he did that I think also got very little attention, relatively speaking, is part of the Emergency Pension Relief Act.
Yes.
I think
Smoothing.
smoothing, working, I believe, with the treasurer, the
Yes.
Secretary of the Treasury, essentially saved about maybe 20 multi-employer pension plans that were not in the best of shape and were not going to
Here
be.
in South Boston.
So there was that, and you can see the extending of caring with the 401k. Not only signing up people, but catch-ups for the ones who may not have paid attention earlier in their careers. They're allowed to do more of that. That just goes to show you his innate desire to help constituents. We've been lucky to have you champion for rural broadband and infrastructure. Affordable broadband is a huge driver of economics, educational opportunity, and everything else. And it's not just rural. There are some gaps in urban areas, in surprising places. And you've been very, very supportive of that. We do have for you and your district, maybe near your home, a tower map that together with some very fine Massachusetts companies, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and we want to make sure you're connected and you have the ways and the means to help us out. The chairman's workload only intensified in these days as the Ways Committee remains intent on holding Russia accountable for the invasion of Ukraine, as you just heard from him. You've made significant progress on that front, guiding a bipartisan effort to suspend that permanent trade relationship. And as government and industry alike have already felt and continue to feel the consequences of this special military operation, also known as a senseless war. If I may, I'd like to kick off the Q&A with a question on this conflict. Chairman Neal, the Ways and Means Committee, under your leadership, has already launched an effort to levy crushing economic pressure on Putin in the form of unforgiving sanctions. I think we're all curious, next out of your committee, what will it be, assuming the trade suspension bill passes in the Senate and Putin doesn't relent on his invasion anytime soon? And do you think, whatever that might be, will it inspire some reciprocal action by some of our strong allies? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really good question. And what I think the next step is, the president, as you know, is in Brussels today, and he's continuing to rally support for NATO. Let's also give Harry Truman some credit on NATO. I mean, you talk about standing the test of time, and where there's been some in NATO over the years who have gone a bit wobbly on some of this, not now. And what's striking to me is that beyond NATO, the Finns, the Norwegians, the Danes, the Swedes are all talking about maybe having at least a Norway-type relationship with EU and with NATO. How about the Kenyans? Pat them on the back. The Japanese, right with us on this. And I think part of that is that leadership that NATO has provided. So the president is announcing a round of further sanctions today. I'm delighted he's going to Poland to once again remind people of what happened with the trade union at Gdansk in 1989. We've had 30 years of relative stability in the world until Putin did this. So I think that the continued effort, getting our partners to stand strong on this and hold on to the sanctions is going to be really important. So I'm curious about the specifics of what the president's going to do. We've given him all the trade latitude with our legislation that he needs, and he can take that to the bargaining table, although I don't think he's going to need to do much bargaining with our NATO allies. Yeah. How about another question here? Jim? You know, just on those catch-up provisions in retirement, what's significant about those catch-up provisions, for those of you who were trying to educate children for college, you probably couldn't set aside some of the money you'd like to. You turn 50 now, you can catch up. It's a really very handsome opportunity to set aside tax-favored dollars for retirement, and automatic enrollment means you're in.
Drug policy reform seems to have hit the wall. But there seems to be a little provision of a fix that might get bipartisan support, and that is the insulin, and capping it at $35 a month for people type 1, type 2. Your thoughts on whether that will pass Congress?
Yeah. I think the insulin issue will pass, perhaps as a freestanding piece of legislation. The challenge we have, even as I've applauded these companies for the great work that they did with the vaccines, the other part of it is that you've got to be able to afford innovation. That's the challenge. And I do think that I understand the argument that comes from many of the companies saying, well, there's no guarantee based on the investment we make for outcome. It's like any risk-taking moment. You put up prescribed numbers of dollars hoping that there's going to be a return plus. And I understand when they say most of our experiments fail, but not to miss the point that at the same time, insulin should not be priced where it is in an open market, and I think the insulin part of it for sure is going to pass.
Some of your colleagues are filing legislation addressing the high cost of gasoline now that it's over $4 a gallon. Senator Hassan has indicated her support freezing the 18.4 federal excise tax on gasoline. Your colleague from the 1st Congressional District in Connecticut, John Larson, has this gas protection act, which would basically say that if gasoline on a given month is over $4 a gallon, then each American would receive $100 a month. Your thoughts on how to address the high cost of petroleum?
Well, I think one of the most challenging parts of the question is we need to recognize that oil is traded as an international commodity. That sounds complicated on the surface, but it's still the issue of supply and demand. And I understand the arguments that are being made. If you subtract the tax revenue for infrastructure purposes, you're not going to get it back. So demand has lessened in the last 3 or 4 weeks substantially, and that's contributed to some small decreases in price. But I think it's essential to remember that even at the national level, that money goes to infrastructure, and that's the normal. I'm getting a nice nod there from people who want those bridges done on Cape Cod. That was very good. Yeah, I didn't miss that. But when you take the money away from the gas tax, you are unlikely to be able to use that money going forward. And so I've been listening very carefully to the argument.
We have time for a couple of questions, and I just want to, again, say that the chairman is a unique lawmaker in the sense that he spends all his time trying to find common ground and passing meaningful legislation. You just heard him allude to the Secure Act, and now he's working on the Secure 2 Act. That doesn't happen by accident. I mean, I remember a few years ago when the Speaker indicated she wanted the USMCA bill passed, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada bill. But she said, I'm going to ask Richie to reach out to all of the Democrats, because many Democrats said, I'm not voting for this trade bill. He just alluded to what it's like to talk about in the caucus. But Richie, I want you to spend all your time and energy working on the Democratic base of the members to say, hey, we need this bill, and we're going to get it on the president's desk. That's how he spent the next 6-8 months, one-on-one with members, addressing their concerns. At the end of the day, the bill passes the House, passes the Senate. People like, Sherrod Brown from Ohio has never voted for a trade bill, voted for the bill. But unfortunately, the congressman, as I said on numerous occasions, is a serious, thoughtful legislator, works across the aisle on meaningful legislation. You can't do it all on Facebook. You can't do it all on Twitter. You can't just do it on social media. Someone has to do the work and work across the aisle. That's what he does day in and day out. I mean, he just alluded to his colleague and Chairman Brady, the Republican chairman of Ways and Means prior to, Richie assuming the position, that they work together on meaningful legislation. We miss that today. We don't put a premium. We don't put a value on that. We put a value on Facebook, name recognition and making the sound bites, but we don't put a value on serious, thoughtful legislators working together on meaningful legislation to improve the lives of so many of our Americans. And that's why I admire him so much, and I know you do too. So with questions, former Means Committee himself, Jeff Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Chairman of the
and,
Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the New England Council as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's great to see you, Congressman, Mr. Chairman, here with us in Boston, because God knows we're happy when you come to Boston, because the people of Springfield in your district, you know, they love you to death. You know, I mentioned to you the Holyoke Parade, and I heard more people saying how you dominated that parade, and that's how you
That's
do.
not the toughest crowd I've had to talk to.
Yeah, they love you. They love you. They love, but it's that, you know, you gave us a little insight, you know, as a former, you know, Ways and Means Chair, you know, it wasn't necessary. I remember having a better relationship with some Republicans that I did with my progressive left partners in my own party. How do you do that? Will you let folks know how you have to constantly spend time with those people in your own team so that they don't, by the way, Facebook, yeah, but Twitter and Instagram, it's quicker, faster, and people are getting it like this. Yeah. And it's the new generation that's growing up. So how do you handle that? Yeah. And how are you having the success? Because God, I'm looking at some of the things that you're doing, and they're coming along.
So the U.S. Trade Representative at the time with the former president, Bob Lighthizer, Republican, and the Emily Cochrane from the New York Times said to me, "When did you know you could get an agreement with Bob Lighthizer?" I said, "When I found out he worked for Bob Dole." Because he's going to want a deal. That's the difference. And so Lighthizer, very old school, he would call me, Jeff, at night, angry. And he'd use every four-letter epithet you can think of, and he would say, "How much longer are you going to keep torturing me on this?" And I said, "See you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. You'll be there, I know." And he'd come in and he'd say to me, "Look, this is abusive what some of them are saying to me." I said, "Yep, but the cameras aren't here. Take it. Let them get it through their systems. And listen to what they have to say." I said, "They're telling you we need enforcement." And so even with the Republicans on the committee, if you watch the tax bill markup, they can get pretty hostile. But I know what they've got to say for their own constituents. I'm fine with that. You think that Pelosi and I are embarrassed by the criticisms we get from them? Not for a moment. And they'd say to me, yelling and screaming at me, and I would simply say, "Thank the gentleman for his question. Appreciate the gentleman's commentary. Appreciate what the gentlelady had to say. Next." Right to the next moment. And I'll take it seriously. All I want is their vote. And that's what we did with USMCA. Just another point here, that, and Jim's been very good on it, the council's been very good on it. The expansion of the Panama Canal has transformed the East Coast. The size of those tankers that are now located in Everett and here in Boston because of the expansion of the Panama Canal. I mean, those Republicans from South Carolina who voted against the infrastructure bill and asked for dredging money, you know, you took the dredging money and the members voted for the bill. So I just think that there's a system of great patience. And the Republicans, when I went to Congress, they liked Tip, because Tip would call them to the rostrum, and he would say, "Tell me how bad it was what you had to say about me back home last weekend." And they would relive for him what they said about him, and he would roar laughing. That's the way I see it. I just want their vote. I mean, it's a bit challenging, and Speaker Pelosi's not liberal enough for them anymore. I mean, she's got a great line when she says, "I always say, I've still got the signs in my cellar from the 60s. And that's the reality of it. But I also think that we're both mindful. I never use excitable language. You want to talk about the issues and the facts? I'm in. If you think that I am going to embarrass you in public, wrong guy. No chance of that. We're going to stick to the issue. But I think that we need to pay more attention to those who want to govern. That's the legislative history, and that's the Massachusetts tradition. You think of what this state has produced on the national stage. pretty extraordinary.
I see Lenny Glenn has his hand up. Lenny, I have a luncheon. I don't want to be late. So if you can keep it brief. Lenny Glenn.
Jim, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm going to limit my remarks today to 15 minutes. All kidding aside, Congressman, I want to echo your opening remarks about Ukraine. I believe people in Ukraine are fighting and dying today, right now, for our liberty, not just theirs. And they deserve every bit of support we can give them. The question is, should we do more to open our doors to refugees from Ukraine, like Andy Grove, who founded Intel and was a refugee from Hungary when the Russians did this in '56? And should we also take some steps to welcome the thousands of Russians who are leaving their country because they don't want to be part of Putin's regime or his, clampdown, and maybe even welcome and encourage Russian soldiers to desert, drop their arms, and join the world of freedom? So the question is, what should we do more to help Ukrainian refugees and Russian political exiles?
Yeah. Good question, Lenny, and there's two things that come to mind. First, we did the call with President Zelensky. He's an inspiration for the world with what he's done. But we took that conversation quite seriously, and the applause was thunderous about all the major points he made. When he got to the no-fly zone, it was more tepid, because that escalates the issue. So the question I think that Joe Biden has attempted to address is containment without escalation. That's a huge opportunity, and with some difficulties. We're going to have to open our arms to more Ukrainians, and I think we should. I'm pained by the fact that we can't do immigration reform in America. At one time we could do it, and it needs to be done. So I'm not for open borders, because that is the point of conflict. But you can do immigration reform. Demographics. The average American family is now, they're having 1.8 children. Now, I know you're saying to me, biologically, that's impossible. But that's the reality. We need immigrants. If you're going to continue to grow labor participation rates, you need that immigrant spirit as well. So I think that opening our arms to Ukraine is essential, and bringing those refugees here is essential. Many of us in this room, our antecedents are because of refugee status. It wasn't called refugee status, but it was being driven off parts of the globe that none of us could have, our families or grandparents could have explained. So I think opening our arms. I just want to say something else, because we're coming off St. Patrick's Day, and I want to say this. Ireland is going to accept, they're a nation of 6 million people, north and south. Ireland's going to accept 75,000 Ukrainian refugees. And they didn't wait for somebody to tell them. They're just doing it.
I know we're going to take a question from Deirdre, but you always give us the inside baseball, what's going
That's
on.
why they're all here.
What are you hearing from your Democratic colleagues, and whether you can retain the House in November?
So the story, that's going to be pertinent, because the other side is less likely to be cooperative as the days fall off the calendar if they think they can win. So I think getting some of this stuff done as quickly as we can is important. The story's far better than it was 6 months ago for us as Democrats. Redistricting has turned out to be a plus, where we all thought we were going to lose 10 seats automatically. It looks as though there's about 5 that we're going to pick up now. The courts have looked favorably upon our plans. I know Jim Siegel and I were talking about Wisconsin, the decision that was rendered just in the last 24 hours. That looks as though it's going to be another plus, only because it maintains the status quo, which is a plus for us. We still have some big decisions in a place, for example, like Ohio, which is likely now to look a lot better as well. Now, we're also leaning against history. That's the reality. The president's party tends not to do very well in midterm elections unless you're Bill Clinton, and we were able to pick up seats in that round. George Bush Jr. did that once as well. So history's not written on it, but I think that there is still no substitute in public life for getting a good candidate. You can have all the conversations you want, but if you can't sell the candidate, it doesn't work. And I spent a lot of time with Sean Patrick Maloney, as you might expect, because I've been helping him with the recruiting. And we've got some spectacular candidates across the country. Just will say this, the primary is the problem now for everybody. And the difficulty with the primary is that you tend to get candidates who are a bit more outside the mainstream. But they can win primaries and maybe not general elections or vice versa. So I think that Maloney has been pretty careful as to who he is soliciting, but it's about winning a primary and a general election. The only partisan thing I'll say, they are likely on the other side to nominate some candidates who are well outside the mainstream. I think that's the reality of what's coming.
Maybe one final question. Deirdre Savage, the Blues.
Congressman, just picking up on that thread and using healthcare as the example, candidate for sure, message. So yesterday was the anniversary of the Affordable Care Act.
12 years.
12 years. And Democrats, it's a controversial topic, but what's not controversial is over 100 million people with pre-existing conditions. Something in, of course, in Massachusetts, we already had that. The rest of the country, that get coverage. 20 million people who didn't have coverage. Build Back Better would include a couple more to make sure that those gains stay. How do you talk about the message discipline going into the midterms? Because people love what the ACA did and the affordable, of course we have work to do on affordability, and what No Surprises can do and what you want to do in mental health and equity. What about the message around there and the discipline around that? How important is that in your mind?
Well, I have the scars on my back from healthcare arguments. Let me just give you another point of personal satisfaction, what it means to be on the Ways and Means Committee. The only committee in Congress that got Bill Clinton's healthcare bill out was the Ways and Means Committee, because we were expected to get it out. And by the time we got to President Obama's healthcare plan, I would defend that to my dying breath. Let me say this to all of you here in Massachusetts. Here's where you can take great satisfaction. Every child in Massachusetts has health insurance. 97%, yeah, that's right, that's exactly right. 97% of the adults in Massachusetts have health insurance. Insurance is based on risk management. You need everybody in the system so you can determine how to proceed. So I'm for universal access, have always been. We could argue about how to do that, but getting it done in terms of getting people into the emergency room, for example, or getting them to see a primary care physician, those are the outcomes that should be desired. I'll submit this to you again because I know you like this. So on the night the Affordable Care Act passed, it was a Sunday. It was ugly. I mean, my home for weeks, the front yard, I mean, the Tea Party was there. Then they became replaced by the left in my front yard as time went on. I knew I was doing something right. So we took that last trip that night, because it went well into the late night Sunday, so there were no joints left open on Capitol Hill on a Sunday night, except for one, the Tune In. Yeah, I stopped in a lot of those places in my youth. We went to the Tune In, and I was with Jerry Costello from Illinois. So Costello had told me for months he wasn't voting for the Affordable Care Act. I listened politely. And he said, I'm not voting for it. That's all there is to it. It's unpopular where I live, and I am not voting for the Affordable Care Act. So it was the Saturday before the Sunday, and he sat down and he said, I am not voting for this bill. And I said, yeah, Jerry, let me tell you something. You're going to vote for the bill. I said, and now we need to decide in the next few hours who you surrender to, Obama or Pelosi. And I said, my advice, surrender to Pelosi. He did that and he voted for the bill. But we went to the Tune-In that night. And all these younger members of Congress were there, and everybody was toasting, with the bottle and tapping. And I remember saying to Jerry, a lot of these folks aren't coming back because of this vote. This is going to cost them their careers. So Earl Pomeroy comes to mind. I don't expect you to remember him. Earl Pomeroy cast that vote from North Dakota. He knew he was going to lose his seat. And today, to your point, Deirdre, 22 million more Americans have health insurance because of those votes. I get a kick out of the ones, it's an easy vote for them. I'm interested in who it's a hard vote for, because those are the ones we need to get.
I think the Democrats lost 63 seats.
We lost
63 seats after that. Well, we want to thank the congressman. Always, always informative, gives us the latest insight, what's going on in the caucus and in the halls of Congress. And also, just to again congratulate him for all the good work that he has done and continues to do on behalf of America.